Greetings and happy International Women's Day. There are so many options to talk of when presented with a theme like International Women's Day. I could talk about the history of this very fine day. I could talk about gaining the vote, gaining the right to work, gaining the right to an education, gaining the right to divorce, to have an abortion, to choose a certain lifestyle. I could talk about my anger, or indeed the collective anger of women. Or, on the same hand, I could talk about my pride in being a feminist, or indeed the collective pride of feminists for all that has been achieved and all that will be achieved. But friends and feminists, what I always remember when someone talks about a topic is not the statistics, nor the facts. I remember the stories. And this is why, friends, that I work in the book trade, as opposed to nuclear science. And it is these stories, mine and all those other women's stories, that bring me here today as a committee member of the Stella Prize for Women. Many of you here would already know about the Stella Prize, and if you do not, I'm going to strongly encourage you to pick up a postcard, to check out our website, where the statistics are that justify our position, put on by our wonderful chair, Sophie Cunningham. Thank you, Sophie. And to support us in our endeavour to fund an Australian Literary Prize for women writers. The concept of the Stella Prize emerged following a panel held, strangely enough, at Readings. On the 100th International Women's Day, the subject of the panel was the underrepresentation of women in our reviewing and prize culture. Conversations that resulted after the event led us, a group of committed and passionate readers, writers and publishers, to begin the arduous task of setting up the prize. We do have some way to go, but we feel determined and excited about both the process and the eventual end result. As the events coordinator of Readings, as a past teacher, a past women's health worker, as a partner, as a friend and as a mother, it seems right and just to me that such a national prize should exist. There is no escape. The political, the identity, the theme of feminism, the theme of International Women's Day is about sharing stories. Today I want to reveal my journey of shared stories that led me here. I was one of those kids that grew up reading. I lived on the outskirts of Melbourne on a hobby farm surrounded by paddocks. Some weeks I would read a book a day. It was my transport. I favoured stories written by women, and I favoured stories written by Australian women. Some of those books and some of those pieces of writing by these Australian women writers have stayed with me. Let me paint you a picture as an example. It's 1981 and I'm 13, sheltered relatively, and catching the bus to my all-girls school. I'm wearing a kilt and a blazer, for Christ's sake. When there's a huge kerfuffle on the back seat of the bus, and sailing over heads and landing in my lap lands a tattered copy of Puberty Blues. You know the novel Puberty Blues by Gabrielle Carey and Kathy Lett, which is a type of proto-feminist teen novel about two 13-year-old girls from Sydney. The girls attempt to create a popular social status by integrating themselves with the Green Hill gang of surfers. On that bus trip up the Quarter Highway, the backseat tough girl, you know the one, grabs it from my lap with a snarl. "Give it here," she says. "That's mine." It takes me yet another year to read a copy when what I believe is the very same copy does the rounds of Year 8. We, all of us private girls, schoolgirls, talk about it endlessly. I had no idea people lived like this. And more importantly, I had no idea why they wanted to live like this. I guess that's the whole point of the book. I knew then I certainly would not be jumping into the back of a van at the whim of some bloke who doesn't even know the meaning of angst. Oh no, I was meant for much greater things. From that moment on, I knew I was a feminist. Now, it did take me another few years to really work out exactly where I'd positioned myself. I found out really by talking too much, but in the end, it was by listening to other women's stories. Louise Swin publisher at Sleepers and a member of the Stella Prize, says that she is in this fortunate position of having people's stories in my head all of the time. I appreciate what she means. Knowing other people's stories, fictional or not, is a passport. One of the gifts Puberty Blues gave me back then in the early 80s was a love of the Australian woman's voice. As a reader, you know you are simply not bullshitted to. The Australian woman's voice, so clear in so many works, fiction or not, is the voice of honesty. Sophie Cunningham's latest book, Melbourne, takes in some of the Melbourne literary scene. She has frequent mentions of such authors like novelist Helen Gardner, historian Robin O'Neill and more. Again, it is this gathering of women's take on the world to make sense of your own landscape and your own truth. It's as if looking at a bookshelf is like looking at a person's diary. There it all is, the secrets, the desires, all hidden among the words of others. Towards the end of my high school years, I was given a copy of Anne Summers' book, Damned Whores and God's Police. And it was this book that really cemented my politics. It's the story of Australia and the women that helped shape it as the nation we know today. It represents one of the missing chronicles of Australia. The fear that more assertions would go missing drove me to preach out loud and often on my soapbox about the need for women's rights. Dr. Summers' book gave me the anecdotes I needed when justifying my position. And back then in the 80s, it felt like I had to justify my position of feminism a lot. By the by, I also felt that way in the 90s, and to be honest, in the noughties as well. Look, and if I'm being completely frank and honest with you, here in 2012, I still feel like I'm justifying feminism, but thankfully now not myself. I guess age does that to you. What was impressive about Summers' book is that it made a call to arms, to join in this vast political and optimistic movement. She taught through her take on a sequence of events, that being a feminist wasn't just about saying no, but being a feminist meant engagement. And I wanted engagement, and I wanted choices, and I wanted notice. I wanted to be part of a collective that stood up and transformed the environment that we lived in. I learnt that you do that best by sharing stories and experiences. You can change the world by forming friendships, or indeed by forming committees. Dare I say, the Stella Prize is a beautiful example of both. My memory at university of reading Helen Gardner's coming-of-age book, Monkey Grip, was actually all about the mutual analysis of it, the mystery and the possibilities of the characters. I read this book because it was given to me by a friend, and it was the topic of conversation for many long nights. We couldn't quite work out if we wanted to be playing starring roles in the novel, or be better and much more smug than those inner Melbourne urbanites. Mind you, I was living in Brunswick at the time. I read this book because I was working out who I wanted to be. As Stella Prize committee member Susan Johnson says in her essay on beauty, everything in me is working towards some unseen goal, some moment of apprehension, of understanding. I remember my dear friend Sarah telling me a long time ago that when she was at university, like a bolt of lightning, it struck her that with every bit of knowledge that she was picking up, she had responsibility to take action. And look, and I think that's right, and I think that is right about feminism. It's one of those amazing movements. It never, ever lets you go. The group of women friends I made in that first alcohol-fuelled year at university are the very friends I tried all my beliefs on before I went public. They were the first ones to hear me read passages from Germaine Greer's The Female Eunuch, to dish politics of the time, to wear purple for International Women's Day. And they were always the first ones to hear me cry. Now, of course, we continue to swap books, TV shows, quips about our lives, and we do so with the knowledge that in the end, all of what we are now, all of our politics and meanings and quirks, can be in some way attributed to one another. Thank you, Tracy. Monica Dux, another Stella Committee member, author and social commentator, did note once in the fabulous journal Kill Your Darlings, edited by Rebecca Stafford, another stellar committee member, is that the difficulties people have in thinking about such a legacy of a book like The Female Eunuch is that the personality of its author tended to get in the way. And I ask, does this actually happen to male authors? Are their personalities ripped apart and displayed with such public glee? I think not. Monica says it's not easy to talk about such a celebrated publication without lapsing into cliches and banalities and repeating the things that have already been said, not once, but dozens of times. As she knows, though, as we all know here, as every mother here knows, the accounts within the movement need to be told over and over to all and sundry, because there is always a teenager just over there waiting to hear. Kirsten Tranter, another Stella Prize Committee member and author, speaks often about supporting younger writers. She says, I think the future belongs to the young women starting to shape the literary landscape, such as Angela Meyer's super sharp, crikey blog, Literary Minded, and the editors of the magazine Kill Your Darlings. This is true, and it needs to be celebrated. Different influences, experiences and histories must be recorded, must be reviewed, must be applauded and built on for feminism to stay vital and current. Every 10 years or so, a feminist must reinvent, repurpose, reinvigorate a belief. Being a feminist allows us to continue to be active and to give continual support to those striving for equality and respect. All of us here know that. There is an inspiring passage in Dr. Summers' introduction to the newly released version of God's Police and Damned Whores that I read at the beginning of the Stella Prize for Women's Writers launch in August last year, and I want to repeat it because the words are so important. She says, Dr. Summers, I don't want to wait until I am 98 to try and explain to a 25-year-old what moved me and so many of my generation to activism and revolt. I want, while there is still some chance of communicating, to tell you the story of the modern women's movement. I want you to know how it started, what we did and what it did to us. In hearing our story, I hope that you also learn something about yourself, about where you stand in this great movement of change, and that it might just move some of you to reach out for the torch. Because, ladies and gentlemen, friends and feminists, it is time for it to be passed. To finish today's soapbox, I want to tell you another couple of tales about women who write about how it is. I'm going to start with a quote from one of my all-time favourite books. This quote begins with saying, "There are 4 ages of women: bimbo, breeder, babysitter, burden." This is taken from Coda by Tia Astley, a book that did not win prizes like her other work, perhaps because it is about an older woman, but did have an impact on me. Kathleen, the strong and funny heroine of the novel, asks herself as she reaches the burden stage of life, what am I going to do with myself? She wants to remain independent, but she also needs people to recognise that she now needs support. Astley, in her candid prose, is giving us, the readers, a case in point of a woman who simply refuses to be invisible. Tia Astley was born in Brisbane in 1925 and became a teacher educated in both Queensland and New South Wales. She was on the staff at the Macquarie University in Sydney from 1968 to 1980. As a wonderful model to other writers, she published for over 40 years from 1958. At the time of her death in 2004, Astley had won more Miles Franklin Awards than any other writer. She won the prize 4 times. She lived the last year of her life in Byron Bay. In 2005, the Tia Astley Lecture was instituted at the Byron Bay Writers' Festival, with Kate Grenville delivering the inaugural one. Kate has given the Stella Prize great support. We're not alone. We know that there are friends out there, and we are really grateful. But let me tell you another story. It is about a woman called Stella Maria Sarah Miles Franklin, who was also known as Miles Franklin. Franklin was born in New South Wales. She was the eldest child of Australian-born parents, John and Susanna. Her best-known novel, My Brilliant Career, tells the story of an irrepressible teenage feminist growing to womanhood in rural New South Wales. This heroine, Sabella, is one of the most enduring characters in Australian literature and obviously had much in common with Franklin herself, who wrote the novel while she was still a teenager. It was published in 1901 with the support of the Australian writer Henry Lawson. Remember, International Women's Day was not even made an official day to acknowledge until 1910, making her work, I think, even more extraordinary. As Franklin had feared, though, gender influenced the critical reception of her novel. When her identity as a woman writer was made public, judgments about its literary merit were common. After its publication, Franklin, who could not survive as a writer, tried a career in nursing and then as a housemaid in Sydney and Melbourne. It's interesting to note how many of our Australian women writers have had jobs as teachers, nurses, cleaners, mothers. A woman's work, never quite done, to support their art. Whilst working in these roles, Stella contributed pieces to the Daily Telegraph and the Sydney Morning Herald under the name of An Old Bachelor and Vernacular. During this period, she wrote My Career Goes Bung, in which Sabella encounters the Sydney literary set. The book, though, sadly, proved too hot to publish and did not become available to the public until 1946. Franklin was committed to the development of a uniquely Australian form of literature, and she actively pursued this goal by supporting writers, literary journals and writers' organisations. I know many other women like this. We know that she had a long-lasting impact on Australian literary life through her endowment of a major literary award, known as the Miles Franklin Award. But what is not yet acknowledged, though, ladies and gentlemen, friends and feminists, is that Stella Maria Sarah Miles Franklin is to also have a huge impact on Australian women's literary life through her actual namesake, the Stella Prize. Right now, we are looking for funding, we're looking for contacts, for support, for kindness, and a shared belief in the importance of women's stories. It's actually quite fitting. Anyway, so I want to talk again about the shared belief in the importance of women's stories. So please, before you leave today, leave your name with us so that we can keep you in the loop. We would like all of you to be part of the journey on creating the Stella Prize. Let me finish with the words, the honest, no bullshit words, from a great Australian author, Stella Maria Sarah Miles Franklin, from her novel, My Brilliant Career. As a tiny child, I was filled with dreams of the great things I was to do when I was growing up. My ambition was as boundless as the mighty bush in which I'd always lived. As I grew up, it dawned upon me that I was a girl, the makings of a woman. Only a girl, merely this, and nothing more. It came home to me as a great blow that it was only men who could take the world by its ears and conquer their fate, while women were forced to sit with tied hands and patiently suffer as the waves of fate tossed them hither and thither, battering and bruising without mercy. Here, on the 8th of March 2012, on the 101st International Women's Day, let us ensure together that this does not happen. To Stella, friends and feminists, to Stella. Thank you.